one of the things that I thought was really great about Thomas Jefferson was that he was a deist and he was not evangelical about it. And there's this quote from Thomas Jefferson that is in the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. There's this dome above it, and in this circle around the dome is this quote: "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." And people who believe that the founders of this country and others wanted America to be a religious country often cite this, and in fact this is one of the reasons why this was carved into the Jefferson Memorial, is to say, you know, he was a religious guy and we're a God-fearing nation. Well, let me just share with you very quickly the actual letter that excerpt came from and the context of it. In 1800, Thomas Jefferson was Vice President of the United States. Back then, the person who got the most votes became President. The second most votes became Vice President. That got changed, I believe, during his presidency. But back then, that was the status. And he was running against the President, John Adams, for the presidency of the United States in the election of 1800. John Adams had been president for 4 years. And Jefferson was running against him. John Adams, arguably one of the worst presidents in the history of the United States, and in 1798, 2 years into his presidency, pushed through Congress and passed by one vote the Alien and Sedition Act, and then used that to put 18 newspaper editors in prison and a member of Congress, Matthew Lyon, the congressman from Vermont, for speaking out against John Adams. In fact, Benjamin Franklin Bach, the grandson of Benjamin Franklin, was put into prison by John Adams for saying that Adams was old, toothless, querulous, and balding. That's what he put him in prison for. So anyhow, in the midst of this election, here's this battle going on. The vice president, who is so PO'd at the president, Vice President Jefferson so hated President John Adams that on the day that Adams signed the Alien and Sedition Act, Jefferson left Washington, D.C. so he would be outside of the district as a statement of protest against it. These men were not speaking at that point, the president and the vice president. And the vice president is running for office. And 3 months before the election of 1800, in the summer of 1800, he writes a letter to his old friend Benjamin Rush, who was a physician and a deist, a fellow deist. The deists believe that all of creation is infused with some extraordinary intelligence and spirituality, but that it doesn't have any manifest form. In other words, that Jesus was just a philosopher, that there is no old man up in the skies with a long beard who makes decisions about things, that things just happen, that the creation was brought about by some intelligence, and then from then on everything just got. That was basically the deist philosophy. That was Jefferson's philosophy, and George Washington's as well. So anyhow, Jefferson writes this letter to Ben Rush. Dear, and he starts the letter out, actually later in the letter, he talks about how, please keep this quiet because my enemies would love to have this information. So here's the letter. He says, Dear Sir, I promised you a letter on Christianity, which I have not forgotten. I did not know that it would reconcile the genus irritable vetum. He likes Latin. It's in Latin for the angry priests. I do not know that it would reconcile the genus irritable vetum, who are all in arms against me. Their hostility is on too interesting a ground to be softened. Then he talks about the First Amendment. And the First Amendment says that there shall be no established religion for the United States. He says the delusion on the clause of the Constitution, which while it secured the freedom of press, covered also the freedom of religion, has given to the clergy a very favorable hope of an establishment of a particular form of Christianity throughout the United States. And as each sect believes its own form, the only true one, everyone perhaps hoped for his own, but especially the Episcopalians and the Congregationalists. And then he talks about the returning good sense of our country. In other words, that his hope that he will be elected president and John Adams will be kicked out on his keister. And so he says, the returning good sense of our country threatens abortion to their hopes, the hopes of the priests. And the preachers believe that any portion of power confided to me, such as being elected president, will be exerted in opposition to their schemes. And they believe rightly, for I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man. But this is all they have to fear from me, and enough, too, in their opinion. End of quote from Thomas Jefferson. So the very quote of Jefferson's that's used to say he was a Bible-thumping guy, no, sorry. February 21st, 1811, James Madison, his first veto. Why? Because, this is a quote from Madison, because the bill vests said church an authority to provide for the support of the poor. End quote. Congress passed a law, said, let's have a faith-based initiative. Let's give, right now we're paying to care for the poor in Washington, D.C. Let's run it through a church. Madison said no. We're going to have a wall of separation between the two. And, you know, I just, the quotes are just, there's so many of them. I'm not going to go off on it but the Republican Party, because they're really all about economics. They're really all about making the rich richer and the middle class poorer. Can't talk about that. So they want to talk about religion.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 866-987-THOM.